Helena?
Hello, Daniel. Hello, hello.
How are you?
Nice that you're there. I am holding up, but I'm
Hold,
very, very
holding up doesn't sound too
no.
good.
What about you?
Also a bit frazzled around the edges, I must say.
Really?
Like in many ways, the World Localization Day initiative couldn't be more topical for me, because I've sort of realized that I was getting caught up in this international weaving and speaking and talking and networking and advocating, and was increasingly losing my grounding, my actual rooting into soul and society, as Satish would call it. And and particularly with a little girl coming late into my life, like being a father now, I've realized that basically what I need to do is to understand that this is a marathon and not a sprint. I can't serve if I don't have something that re-nourishes me, and from which I draw actually the deeper wisdom and the deeper beingness from which to do my work. And long story short, like I'm radically relocalizing. Like I'm close to disappearing for a couple of years to just focus on building our finca here and planting a forest and those kind of things.
Yeah. I hope that you'll still, devote some of your time to getting the word out and what I call big picture activism, because, we all need to live in that way. But I see there's still this huge need for communication and big picture, and letting more people know how delightful it is to live a more local life. There's all this discussion about people having this fear about letting go of this civilization and what a tragedy that it's breaking down. But I mean, you and I know from our lives and from our work with eco-villages that a lot of people who live in those ecological communities have a lot better life than the people in the big city who are running after the dream of being, powerful, wealthy, important, famous.
Yeah, no, I mean, but for me, I got to a point where it is a balance, and I was basically too balanced on the advocacy side and not enough living my practice. But also having a little daughter means I naturally, in the next, now she's turning 3, in the next 3 years, I have to find a community in which I feel comfortable that she gets the sort of, it takes a village to raise a child. And so I mean, it's always going to be a bit of a dance for me to find the right balance, because of course my income comes from more of the global work rather than the local work. But being locked, I mean, you can't imagine what it was like here in Spain. We were literally locked into our apartments with no ability to exercise or even go for a brisk short walk in order to get some fresh air. We were lucky enough to have a roof terrace to, on whatever, 15 square meters, run around in a little bit. But all these large families locked into 40, 50 square meter apartments with 5 people, with no balcony. I mean, I can only imagine the scenes and the horror that some people lived in Spain.
Yeah, and I think it led to developing this appetite for nature, for community, for connection, and then all this, appetite too to start doing things more creatively, like baking instead of buying things ready-made. And so that happened in Spain as well, didn't it? It certainly happened in many cultures.
Absolutely. Like also, I mean, there's already some wonderful developments in terms of relocalization. Just here on Mallorca, what happened is that all the local farmers suddenly get the attention that they deserve, and even the more conventional local farmers, like not necessarily the organic farming or regenerative farming community, but everybody was suddenly rapidly trying to build up direct marketing to the customer, and everybody on Mallorca seems to be getting veg boxes now from local farmers. It's wonderful. So
that's also, for us, that's such an important foundation stone for a healthier economy. So it is a really, really positive effect of the whole
Yeah.
pandemic, isn't it?
And I can see some signs, like, for example, just last week, the local government announced that they were investing in 50 new solar parks on dry land, land that isn't farmed. Before they were very hesitant to give out permits to build up the solar energy, renewable energy capacity of the island. And now it seems something has startled them into understanding that we really need to provide the basics for the regional population as much regionally as possible, and that includes energy and food and water sovereignty. So
I must say, I'm a bit worried about using, putting the panels on the land rather than on rooftops. So, because I would love to see that land, again, in terms of climate, everything, restoring carbon means, either diversified, healthy food production, including animals, which can actually help, to be a carbon sink, or forestry, but to have the land fertile and to just put, is that what they're doing? They're putting panels.
No, I completely agree with you. It's just that in my experience of working with political processes, it's already a move forward for them to say, we're going to give permission to 50 new solar farms. Then you can have the conversation about what the appropriate place would be. And you'll definitely get a lot of that issue of, we should really be planting forests here and not putting solar panels up here. But I think it's always, for me, one of the things where we fall short sometimes is that we very quickly jump at pointing out the shortfall of something, rather than say, yes, great, and we need to really have a conversation on where's the best place to put the solar panels.
Yeah, I think that can happen, but I also see a lot of people who simply don't think about the holistic picture, and therefore will think, solar anywhere, everywhere, is what we need. And, the whole discussion about fueling the global economy with renewable, blasting the Sahara with panels and exporting it to Europe, all of that. But why don't you talk a bit about how you see, now the pandemic and the fork in the road? What do you see as our options as we come out of that?
Well, I find all the work that, you've spent another 25 years longer than me, and I've already spent 20 years on this path, of reminding people that as we're becoming a global species moving into the planetary era, and there has been this globalization of awareness in terms of we are one species living on this planet, we need to rebalance all of that by paying much more attention to what we haven't paid attention to in the last 250 years, which is the local and the regional. And the pandemic has shown, and will, I think, continue to show in the next years to come, how fragile global supply lines are, how destructive they really are. And also having had that really close to home personal experience, almost everybody on the planet now, with this sudden change being possible, the whole conversation around transformative change has a whole different basis now, because previously people like you and me and visionaries saying we can redesign the system in a much healthier way, that we actually reintegrate into the community of life and become a nurturing keystone species in the local ecosystems we inhabit, and make the places more abundant and more vibrant and more resilient. All of that sounded like, that's very nice, but it's impractical, and we can't fundamentally change things quickly. Now you can always say to people, well, did you see how fundamentally quickly we changed things in response to this viral pandemic? And so I think that a lot of people have been touched in one way or another by something that previously seemed too abstract and too theoretical for them. And so building on that experience, it makes sense even to local government officials that a post-COVID-19 recovery plan has to build community resilience, has to build ecosystems health. I'm delighted to see how much the conversation has moved on to, let's move on to a new normal rather than the old normal, because the old normal was murderous and killed more people than the virus has killed so far. and also the way that people are understanding that to reinvest in technologies that were actually driving us full speed over the climate cliff, and that the suffering that would cause or will cause is just exorbitantly larger than the pandemic suffering, although you can never compare suffering. I mean, that's something that, being German, I'm always very sensitive to not comparing that many people to that many people suffering, because suffering is something to avoid for all of humanity. But yeah, I see.
Könntest du, eine Sekunde, sorry, but could you push the screen down a bit more so your head is, I should have done this earlier, even slightly more, because when you sit back, it's proven extremely difficult to do this with most speakers. I don't know if you know Al or Lada, but that's very good. That's much better. You're much more central. But are you going to stay like that, or are you going to lean back more?
I can stay like that.
Yeah. Okay. Please continue.
One thing that I realized increasingly is that if we want to, one thing that I say a lot, redesign the human impact on the planet from being degenerative to being regenerative, and if we want to do that in accordance with the patterns of life, I had this wonderful conversation with Fritjof Capra, where Fritjof distilled his lifetime's experience of studying the systems view of life down to saying life is a regenerative community, that life creates conditions conducive to life by creating communities. And if we want to redesign the human impact on the planet, we need the political ideal of subsidiarity to become the new real. Because you cannot get citizen participation, you cannot empower re-regionalization and local resilience building and climate response and more collaboration and cooperation at the local level if people are disempowered by political systems where decisions are made by centralized governments. And like even the COVID response here in Spain, you could see that some of the decisions were made by panicked politicians in Madrid, very much with the situation of Madrid in front of them, but not understanding that for many, many people around the country, the situation of living in a small village and maybe 2 kilometers from the center of the village, having your little huerto, your little farm and your little garden, which supplied these families with vital food, the restrictions were such that people weren't allowed to go to those gardens. And that at the point where food sovereignty and local food was the most important, food was rotting in the fields because of these regulations. And that kind of thing would never happen in a subsidiarity-based governance system. So the whole enabling step to really empower relocalization means that we have to become much more political in asking for subsidiarity to not just be written into the European Constitution, but actually be the fundamental of how we rearrange things now. And I see a lot of positive change. Like I got contacted by people who work with Doncaster City Council, and they want to look at this whole notion of regenerative cultures and re-regionalization and using the frameworks that we've developed in H3 Uni to take their team through a process of really looking at what can we do to revitalize the regional economy, to build food, water, energy sovereignty, and to basically make ourselves less dependent on large supply lines that can be disrupted so easily by so many different scenarios that we can imagine for the 21st century.
And I think it's really important that we understand that decentralizing political power is simply not possible unless we also decentralize economic activity. So you've had, certain, throwing off to the local government. Oh yeah, you can do this, you can do that, but no funding to do it. And it's ended up being, you can look after the elderly, you can look after the sick, you can do a bit of environmental protection, but all the funding has been going towards supporting, subsidizing, rolling out the red carpet for global infrastructure and global players. And that you know, especially in terms of the creation of money. You know, it's led to this casino superstructure that is not only preventing local economies from being empowered to do what they need to do, but it's been disempowering governments. Now suddenly we see that in COVID, there was money available from the giant banks that are actually private, that suddenly there was all this money available. And so don't you think another really important part of the discussion is this economic reality of who has the right to create the money, who controls that? Can we hope for, you know, democratic process to start scrutinizing that side of things?
No, absolutely. Like, I mean, the fundamental driver of degenerative behavior on this planet is a economic and monetary system set up to favor those who exploit people and planet. And as long as we have that zero-sum game type system set up, we're not going to be able to be regenerative. I mean, I find, like, even in the corporate world, even with larger international companies that are trying to be regenerative these days, the most intelligent leaders in those companies understand that there is a too large not to fail, too large not to be degenerative. And like I often remind people of, like, last year, Yvonne Cunard from Patagonia wrote this piece where he was basically saying, they brought me the news that our company is $1 billion turnover company. I dreaded that moment. I cannot see how I could lead a company that has a meaningful impact in the world at that scale.
Yeah, I know Yvonne quite well, and I think, you know, we need to point out that this is a privately owned company, and that's the great paradox, that the publicly traded corporation is a much more dangerous animal, because it becomes this blind machine with these expectations of profit, again, that are blind and systemic. And so paradoxically, you know, because generally speaking, you know, we're assuming that private is worse than publicly owned or publicly traded, but this is a really important distinction too, in understanding why things have gone so wrong. And there are some leading lights, you know, in the world of privately owned corporations.
It's the same, like working with Lush a little bit in the last few years, mainly on their giving side and their kind of animating new regenerative production in local areas to basically build a responsible supply chain. They're doing really wonderful work, but they can, again, also only really do it because they're largely family owned, and or now also partially employee owned, because they've done a transfer to their employees. And those are the really leading companies, tend to be in that structure and not to be too beholden to shareholders that are just then ultimately taking over.
Do you also see how, even when you have these enlightened companies, and even when you have attempts by citizens to come together to create more localized economic structures, they were all up against this craziness where human labor and human intelligence, human care is too expensive, because endemic to the economy has been subsidizing, regulating, and supporting every individual institution, even government institution across the board. We are being pushed to always choose technology over employing people. What would you say about that, Daniel?
Yeah, for me, that is increasingly, I'm sort of noticing how I've personally never been that comfortable with just jumping on new technologies just because they're there. And I've actively, even in my life, so for example, I don't use WhatsApp because I just don't want to have that technology in my life and how it then shapes my life. I keep thinking of Buckminster Fuller's statement that if you want to change the way people think, give them a tool, the use of which will change how they think, rather than telling them what to think. And to some extent, I'm realizing how much our minds have been I learned this new word recently by an Australian Aborigine elder. Our minds have been Columbused. They've been colonized by the technologies we use, and even the benefits. Like we're talking on Zoom now, but increasingly there's so many well-meaning people out there trying to use technology, blockchain, holochain, you name it, to take more money out of the degenerative economy and funnel it towards regenerative practices. But in the process, we are also setting up mechanisms that would ultimately only the local farmers who are willing to use a smartphone and sensors and all that kind of stuff will be able to access it. And for me, that is a real warning light, because if we really want to celebrate diversity, I think we need to explore how we can create enabling conditions for people who, like the wonderful indigenous people that Martin from Hildebrand works with in Colombia and the Amazonian rainforest, rather than them having to use all this technology, they should be allowed to do regenerative forest management like they have done over millennia, using their tribal worldview and their storylines that they transmit through ritual and storytelling and so on. That's valuable human diversity that if we only allow people to be part of the human community, if they use technology, then we're actually colonializing through technology, and that I'm increasingly concerned about. But
I
then
think it's very interesting. It's very interesting that you even mentioned the farmers on Mallorca, because this is our experience, that even in the modern world, the imposition of these technologies systematically destroy the small. We're talking about very expensive tools, we're talking about the barcode, and now we're talking about possibly only being able to use digital money. It all supports the giants to the detriment of the smaller players. So if we look at the vital importance of smaller scale, diversified farming to feed the world, which I think is a very, very important understanding, that smaller diversified farms can be far more productive than any monoculture ever can. And that we need
can be I think you should say because
well,
still
okay, good. Say that. You go ahead and say that, because I'm happy to hear you say that. But yeah.
Well, I mean, if you really look at the figures, there's still more food being produced by peasant farmers who are predominantly women all over the world, rather than by large green agribusiness or non-green agribusiness. This whole lie of the green revolution has fed millions of people. It transferred fossil fuel into food that killed people rather than fed them in the long term, and changed dietary habits and eroded biodiversity. So
and killed. Very importantly, we need to say it also killed the soil. And even in the early stages, it was never producing more per acre of land or unit of water. What the great efficiency was that it could produce more food with fewer people. So at the same time that it killed the health of the soil and affected our health negatively and destroyed productivity, it destroyed jobs. And now, you know,
eroded communities.
And and you know, also, you know, as you've seen too, as you destroy those jobs and you try to argue in the dominant sort of narrative that this is a tragedy, then the argument is also people don't want to farm. But you're as familiar as I am with this micro trend of young people who do want to farm and who are involved in permaculture. And I'm sure you've seen it in Germany as much as you've seen it on Mallorca.
I mean, I think we are still for the movement of people wanting to find more balance in their life and more meaning and more connection and more community, but also having grown used to these communications technology and having developed other skills and so on that they would also like to play, like the creating new models by which people can spend some of their time farming and some of their time working in other creative industries, and enabling this balance. I think we're still on the journey of that. Like, because personally, this has been my in terms of lifestyle design for myself. I've always said, like, I remember when we moved to the Alpujarra in southern Spain in 1999, Alice and I trying to set up an eco-village and environmental education center. I said, I dream of the time where I can spend 5-6 hours on the fields and working with people on the land, and then come home, have a meal, and then spend 4 or 5 hours doing my writing and reading and my thought work, so to speak, and finding that regular balance in everyday life. But I, even in Findhorn, living, like, I thought that moving to Findhorn, I could somehow design my life in that balance. But what I noticed is that even at Findhorn, what happened, unfortunately, is that you get the people who work in Cologne Gardens or in the farm, and then you get the people who work in the offices, and we seem to separate yet again into either you do that or that, rather than really enable structures that allow both. And
you know, this is exactly, it's been the dream of all of us in Local Futures, and we ever since living in Ladakh, this was exactly our dream. It was, as you said, precisely about half the day on the land, in community, and using our bodies and moving, and not, you know, sitting in a chair. And we have ended up spending far too much of our time in front of the computer. And for me, when I look at it, I basically see that it takes an entire village, not just to raise a child, but to raise a crop, to raise a barn. And I see it as a function of not enough vision, not enough big picture vision to realize that we need to build up the numbers. Because once we have a bigger, and I'm talking about what the minimum would be, I'm not sure, but in order to build up the momentum so that between us, we could actually have a new economy that would really so value this lifestyle and the ability to do some work with our hands, to use our bodies, and that would so value the ability to be productive, engaged with the uniqueness of specific products, specific types of wood, the specifics of a soil, the specifics of a climate, in order to build up that potential for a group of people to demonstrate that we would need to work far less than we believe we would need to. You know, I've seen it in indigenous culture, but I have yet to see it properly in the new experimentation. And for me, in the new experiments, like eco-villages and other communities, there hasn't been, I think, enough attention to numbers, that we actually need more people, not all in one institution by any means, but with enough of a support network and trade and connection to be able to step out of what has been fossil fuel based for hundreds of years, and from the very beginning with slavery and so on, was a process of extracting wealth for the few, and destroying the ability for people to live off natural resources and provide for themselves, and to do it in a humane and deeply ecological way. So to regenerate that, to restore that, I think, again, why I so emphasize big picture activism, is to build up the numbers and to try to encourage also that there are certain, what we call localization hubs, which are already emerging all around the world. And in fact, I've said thousands, and one of the most exciting is Seongmi-san in South Korea, in Seoul, where there are 20,000 people that have been collaborating to build up an alternative, including an alternative school. And now some of them are moving out, and they have, a farm school. They also have many small businesses in this part of Seoul. So I think that's a key, is not thinking we can go out, a handful of us on the land and suddenly create this different lifestyle, which is also why it's very exciting when things start happening at the level of a region or a town, where we see now in the localization movement, we see awareness trickling upwards, as you were saying now in Mallorca, supporting solar energy, and in many areas, the support for local food economies. So once we can start working also with local government, but it's got to be, everything I'm seeing is there's got to be, through civic society, pressure to change government. And as you said, with that principle of subsidiarity, because even local government can just strangle you with heavy top-down regulations that are stupid and counterproductive.
Well, and sometimes it's the, again, because regulations are made in silos, everything is in silos. And so you get somebody with the best of intentions saying, well, the Tramontana Mountains are the UNESCO World Heritage Reserve and you can't do anything here. But that then also means that any attempt to ecologically develop, like to basically build new systems, is also impossible there. And so sometimes we block our, because we don't think holistically enough. And I actually think that increasingly, and particularly now in this post-COVID response, there's a huge opportunity where some of the old lobbies and some of the old powers of industry and so on, of the destructive economic powers, are now in a weak spot. Like I see this in Germany, the car industry, for example. And so there's a unique opportunity there to actually say, okay, if we support you in transforming, then you need to not go back to what you were doing before, but do something else. And you need to work with local communities, and you need to enable this sort of decentralization and re-regionalization and relocalization in order to create a more resilient systems. In nature, things don't happen always at larger and larger systems and erode redundancies. Redundancies are really important, and they need to happen through people producing things at local and regional scales. And but I think that the opportunity we now have is to break down more at the local scale the three sector thinking of saying, okay, that's the role of government, that's the role of civil society, and that's the role of business, and understand that in the businesses and in the governments are people, normal people that are part of the community. They are civil society as well. And so how do we begin to really erode, like that's why I spent some effort here on Mallorca with friends launching this fourth sector network, because in many ways this idea of the fourth sector is another way of saying, let's erode the boundaries between those three sectors and create that fertile sector where people are kind of working with local government to address the local government issues, using some of the skills they've learned in the business world, but using the ethics of the civil society movement, and create this fertile new system. And I think it's, while it needs subsidiarity from the political perspective, it also needs new forms of business. Like I had a really nice conversations with Donnie McLurkin from the Post Growth Institute, and his whole vision of changing all companies to be not-for-profit companies, and localizing in that way that companies are basically there to serve the local benefit, and there's a sort of ceiling at which people can't earn any more financial gain for themselves as owners of the company, but actually just they've got their salary, and then the company is assessed by how much it produces benefit in the local community.
Although, I would say that I've seen both in more traditional settings and now in the sort of new local, that when you actually have the awareness, and precisely as you say, in a way from the fourth sector, it's a combination of activists, environmentalists, social activists, local business owners, and sometimes also local government individuals that together start creating the new initiatives. So for instance, in all the farmers markets we've helped to start around the world, it's been that kind of mix of people that have come together, and also both the producers and the consumers. So once you start getting the awareness of the need to build something that is more decentralized or localized and is on that scale, and you're actually creating structures where the human interdependence is visible and clear, you suddenly start finding that even, you know, private business, for-profit business, operating within a visible and accountable structure inevitably has both the social pressure, the community pressure, and the ecological realities that again are visible both to the business and to the consumers. So you start getting a structural move in the direction of what is both socially and ecologically accountable and healthy. So I think sometimes by talking about turning business away from profit and just towards, you know, non-profit, I worry that we're trying to invent things that will be more difficult to achieve. And I'm just so thrilled and amazed at, particularly in the local food movement, how much has been achieved using the conventional currency and working within, you know, a profit motive, but because of the scale and the clear interdependence, you're creating completely different structures. You know, the local market actually is pressure towards diversification. Once you're being pressured to diversify, the need to use toxic chemicals and the fear that comes from, you know, when it's a monoculture, everything can be destroyed by one hailstorm or by drought or flood. Whereas when you have that diversity, you already have a protection. So there are certain very structural and very real reasons why smaller scale and
absolutely. I mean, I see it here on Mallorca that there, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but there's close to 100 different species of almonds. There are over 240 species of fig trees on the island. There's somebody who's collected all the fig trees of the world and planted in one finca examples of all of them. And just on the land that my mother stewards here on the island, there's some fruit trees and there's different types of apricot trees. And this year, the big tree that used to give this glut of apricots has hardly any. And the other tree that in the last few years always came in a bit too late and ended up getting the bugs and where we hardly harvested anything is the one that we're harvesting from. And it's because they're two different types of apricots and they just flower in a slightly different time of spring. And that means the second one didn't get the last frost and is the productive one, and the first one basically this year wasn't the right one. And by having that diversity, you actually risk manage for environmental fluctuations. And all cultures knew this, but we've kind of applied the rules of engineers and physicists that work on production facilities and like mechanisms to streamlining biological processes, and that was a major mistake.
Well, life or death, really. And we've got to wake up now to why we're extinguishing species and maybe extinguishing ourselves. And that's absolutely fundamental, that mechanistic view. But, you know, having been so outside of the Western system, I'm not seeing it so much as we doing it. I am seeing people that were pushed off the land, because I'm seeing it right now in China and India and of course in Ladakh and Bhutan. And when I say pushed, I mean through psychological warfare that makes you feel like a primitive nobody if you're on the land, and then rolling out the red carpet that makes it seem that through media, advertising, schooling, everything telling you if you want to be someone, you've got to be an urban consumer and conform to this monocultural image. So with all of that going on, I would much rather that, rather than saying we, I'm not trying to say in some old-fashioned Marxist sense, but we need to look at the economic system that led to this extractive mechanistic view, and this extractive system enabled it to control so many people and to push so many people off the land and to disempower so many people and get them so insecure. I mean, that's what I see in the West, you know, that often we've been made to feel so insecure and so anonymous that we've then become, you know, totally obsessed with the idea of being someone. And that means, again, into that urban environment, being important, lots of money, the right look, lots of power. And of course, we know now from those super famous, super wealthy people, Russell Brand being one of the people who writes about it.
Rehab all the time because they're so,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
little meaning
Yeah.
in their life.
Yes.
That
Yeah. Yeah.
come to drugs and yeah.
Yeah.
No, I would love to ask you one question. From your perspective, this framing that I use with the three horizons, or increasingly I've actually seen the three horizons also very much matching Joanna Macy's hospicing a dying system and midwifing a new system, and that there's some sort of bridge in between that are kind of not maybe the final patterns, but the patterns that allow us to make the journey in the second horizon. What I find useful of this little map is that the old system doesn't completely die away. The red line still goes on into the future, but in a much smaller way. And it speaks of what is the baby in the bathwater of the global industrial system that maybe in a very transformed way, but that we actually want to keep certain things. Like, for example, how in this hyper-localized world, like I know that there are experiments with open source ecology and local maker labs and stuff. How will we create, maybe not for everybody, but publicly accessible, this kind of technology, so sometime in the future I can still sit in front of a computer and have a conversation with you and say, hey, Helena, we made it. It's 20 years on and things have changed beautifully. How do you see that balance of still maintaining some things like some positive parts of emergency medicine and technology for communication and all those, like?
Yeah. Well, I see, first of all, that we urgently need to understand, again, the economic system, who has been in control in terms of, first of all, creating the technology of money, controlling it, and how our governments have become subservient to this global system. And it goes beyond the sort of previous critique of capitalism, because once we understand the ecological realities, once we understand the absolute necessity for maintaining diversity, and that is, you know, biological as well as human. For human beings to survive and thrive, they need to have the right to be recognized as unique individuals, you know, a genuine individualism. And that also means understanding the link between cultural diversity and biological diversity. So that once we see that we need to move in that direction, to move away from this mechanistic, energy-intensive, highly wasteful system, the first thing we need to do is to look at which technologies could actually genuinely serve us. And we need to take back the power. We need democratic processes whereby we determine, so we want to use aspects of the internet, we want to use them for communication. We recognize that now for a long time in the future, we're going to need certain tools, possibly the drones and the satellites, to monitor climate, to be able to deal with the catastrophic effects of this energy-intensive system. But if we don't look at that carefully and really start doing the numbers and see how much of those technologies, how much of that energy is going into creating useless products, built-in obsolescence, pushing every child on the planet to feel the absolute need to have both a new set of shoes and fashion and clothing, but above all, electronic objects that have to be replaced every year to be upgraded. We've got to step back and look at what are the tools that really do serve us. And we have to look honestly at the whole ecological footprint. And that means the minerals, the mining, what it's doing on the other side of the world. I think once we do that, and once we start taking democratic control, I think we could envision a world where we do choose to use, for instance, for society, these tools for communication, and as I say, for emergency rescue. But what I think we'll find is that most people would prefer, where possible, to do their work within a more decentralized system where they don't need to spend so much time on the screen. I think we're finding now, even in medical terms, we're finding a different experience from the face-to-face situation. So I know people who have been, suffering from adrenal stress and so on, who find that the Zoom calls and even sometimes telephone calls can be quite exhausting, whereas face-to-face communication between people can be truly nourishing. And we're realizing now there are all kinds of things going on. There is an attunement, there is an energy flow, there's the eyes, there's even the smells that we're not conscious of. So I think we'll find that for our everyday working life, we will want to move in a direction where we support more decentralized economies. And that would mean that, not only the basic needs of food, clothing, and shelter, but even a lot of, like for instance, here in Bayern, we have a local newspaper. We know the editor, we know the 10 people who are in that office that we can go and visit and who are very well informed about what happens here. That type of decentralization, I think we will see that for multiple reasons, that we actually prefer that we're happier, healthier, and we have more accountable and genuinely democratic structures. When it comes to using the internet for communication, I think we will also want to rely more and more on having had some kind of personal chain of connection in terms of validating and having better knowledge in order not to be so vulnerable in this post-truth world.
That could come, because one thing that I'm personally wrestling with a bit at the moment is, yes, more participatory, direct, subsidiarity-based action on the ground by communities working together. But you and I know from experience of that even within the experiments that are the eco-village movement, it's not like there are disagreements on how to do things in a community. And in those experiments, there is actually, while there's enormous diversity, there's some sort of alignment also around everybody came together in an intentional community to want to build an alternative model, live healthier and differently. What I'm sometimes wondering in this process of redesigning towards enabling much more citizens' participation on the ground is, where's the role of education and the lag effect of having spent 40 years of longer to hundreds of years brainwashing people into a certain way of thinking, that it actually takes a sort of democratic maturity and also a level of education for people to then make the right choices when they make the right choices together. Like if you just tomorrow here on Mallorca said, okay, now we all have to agree with all citizens of Palma of how to spend the budget of Palma, I don't think they would necessarily be spent on the most sensible things tomorrow, because people haven't been trained to think holistically about all the things that they need to put in place to create a healthy city. What they believe they really need is what has been planted in their heads by advertisement and 20 years or longer of living in this consumptive culture. So how do you see the enabling of wise local participation through education?
Well, I would say that what I'm seeing is that there's a certain leadership in terms of creating these more localized communities and economies. Very interestingly, a lot of the leadership from that comes from people who've seen a lot of the world and who have lived in different cultures. And I'm sort of, my conclusion is that by living in different cultures, people have started becoming more aware of a dominant system and a dominant narrative towards the consumer culture, empty life. And they've also, those generally the leaders have also had a bit of a taste of something a bit more earth-based, a bit more community-based, a bit slower, a bit also more rich in terms of intergenerational community. They've come to understand that the monoculture, you know, in terms of age groups and the alienation, the speed of the typical urban, modern sort of peak experience that we're supposed to value is dead and empty. So it comes out of this consciousness, which, by the way, I think this huge curve back where we bring something with us into the future, a lot of that is the experience of both sides of this equation, which makes people much more committed to doing things differently, to want actively to get closer to the earth, to develop an appetite for being closer to animals, for understanding the plants and the richness of that. It's a profoundly spiritual and psychological wealth that we recover when we move in that direction. But so what I'm seeing is around the world that there are certain groups that are taking leadership, and there are certain hubs in the world that are beginning through a lot of pain and discussion, you know, whether it be in eco-villages or in what's sometimes called transition towns, and many similar, what I would call localization hubs. You see that people are managing, despite enormous pressures in the opposite direction, to start to come together because of that deep commitment. I believe that what's needed there still is a deeper and broader knowledge, to have greater clarity about what to say no to and what we want to affirm. And I think after COVID, I really feel the fork in the road is, do we unconsciously want to support a leap into the arms of robots and a rat race to take us to Mars to look for more minerals because we just trash this earth? And this hyper masculine, I mean, I call it a teenage boy culture, is blind and immature. On the other side, led by women, is this broad movement that I would call the worldwide localization movement. And it really is in every culture that I know of, led by women. Much larger number of women are actually feeling, you know, again, physically, I think that deeper connection to nature, and they have that deeper spiritual awareness of what is our home, what is our true home, what can nurture my children and me to feel more at peace, to feel more joyful, to be healthier. And that's an awareness not only of the communion of life in terms of non-human life, but in terms of community, in terms of being more sophisticated, in terms of social relationship. So I see it happening, and I just think with more clarity, so that we put more, essentially, money and support behind that path back home to community and the earth. I think then we'll find that actually so many of the problems that you've seen, that I've seen in eco-villages, so much of it will fall away, because we're not aware how much of that dispute and those you know, controversies and arguments actually emanate from trying to swim in a system where literally every law and regulation, every subsidy, every dollar that comes into the area is born of and from that teenage boy system, that mechanistic system. So you're all the time fighting against the tide, and you're, you know, the speed of it all. And, you know, this is another thing that was so fascinating to me, living in an ancient culture like Ladakh. I realized, oh, they are so lucky, because every decision they take is not some great discussion about, are we going to do this way or that way or this? They were so lucky. They inherited a way that worked for nature, that worked for people. And the modifications they made over their journey happened over a longer period, you know, the experimentation and the, you know, so they were under so much less pressure than we are. Now, as we move forward, I want us to be kinder and gentler with ourselves, you know, be more aware that we are swimming in this incredibly difficult system. It's not because we're so bloody selfish or egotistical by nature. We've sort of imprisoned. And I think, yeah, again, this sort of...
I live that in my own life. Like sometimes decisions that I have to make in order to pay the bills for my family aren't necessarily the decisions that if I had a universal basic income and could fully follow my bliss and my passion and my desire to be of service, I'd put the emphasis a little bit somewhere else. Like some jobs, I mean, I'm lucky enough that I've been always working in the economy of meaning more than the economy of money. And I've rather choose not to earn so much and have less, but do something that fulfills me. But sometimes when I'm in this situation where I have to use, well, this is quite fulfilling and it pays, and this is really fulfilling, but it doesn't pay. And right now I need a little bit of income, so I'm going to choose this one.
And by the way, that I so agree, you know, earlier you said about not being purist. And I think this is a perfect example where I would just love people, I think with that deeper, broader awareness, as I said, they could be a bit kinder to themselves and they could more willingly accept that they have to make a compromise. And so I'm saying to so many people who might still be working in a corporate job, as long as they're not involved in selling weapons or, you know, truly toxic chemicals, perhaps it's fine to stay there and to earn a bit of money, to save, maybe go part-time, but don't think that we can, as individuals, be the change we want to see in the world. I mean, I love Gandhi, but I think that slogan does not help us to change the I to a we. So the we that we create is something that's going to take collaboration, it's going to take time, and we cannot do it as individuals.
And in many ways, that's the answer to my question. It's the journey that we go on together that will actually educate us to do things differently. I'm noticing more and more in this sort of, we're in this, it's a transformational journey that probably already started decades ago and is only building speed and potential for real transformation to occur now. And we're probably going to be in it for another few decades if we make it. And in the process, we'll do a lot of learning. I would love to. I know that we're kind of using a dual function for this call. Like on the one hand, we're going to take some snippets for the day, but it would be great. Could you tell me a little bit more about the World Localization Day, and it's a Local Futures project, and how has it come together?
Yeah. Well, basically, you know, Local Futures for 40 years more really has been about raising awareness about the destructive nature of the globalizing path of the economy and we've been promoting decentralization and localization for all that time. And it came out of experiences with indigenous culture and a conviction that we need to reconnect deeply to life. And that meant we could choose a path that meant both human and ecological healing simultaneously. In the last, what is it now, 10 years or so, we've been organizing international conferences around the world. And, you know, this was sometimes, particularly in recent years, people were questioning whether it's meaningful to be traveling. But we, as I said earlier, we really believe in the need for deeper communication, deeper exchange, particularly between the so-called third world and the first world. Less industrialized, more industrialized, urgently needed because there's so much misinformation both ways. So these conferences were very meaningful for many people, and we brought in some of our network of speakers who were very clear about how the global trade treaties were destroying democracy, driving up emissions, etc., and had experience of localization. Michael Schumann, for instance, he's one of the world experts on local finance for local business and building local economies. Charles Eisenstein, who philosophically and in a holistic way embraces all this. So we've been doing these international conferences, and this year we were planning to do more, including working with the new government in Mexico. We were very excited about. And then COVID hit. And so, it's very recently, but a little over a month ago, we decided in Local Futures, we're a small international group, to try to put these conferences on the web instead. And we could see that really, this pandemic had opened eyes in a way that we felt the time was right to try to claim this as World Localization Day. We so want to show that these millions of people around the world, both in more traditional and in the new local, are demonstrating a way forward. And that way forward doesn't mean that the end point is everything is produced locally. What does local mean? It's a relative term, but it's a process of shortening distances. It's fundamentally about diversifying. It's fundamentally about slowing down, because to love, to care, to nurture takes time. And that we need to nurture life back to life, whether it's the plants or our own children or our own souls. We desperately need that possibility to scale down and slow down. So that's what localization is about. It's happening, and there are so many beautiful examples of how it can work, and we're trying to gather as much of that as we can on this one day where we'll have an online program. And we've been so thrilled to have the support of Noam Chomsky, and just recently this wonderful letter from the Dalai Lama, who now talks about how when he was a young boy in Tibet, they did have most of what they needed from their region and local economy. So we'll have a very interesting blend of people from left to right, and we're particularly keen to reach the Anglo world, which has been often vulnerable to the propaganda of the corporate globalizers, believing that this global economic interdependence was actually creating a village, was actually creating genuine collaboration. And so we want to reach them with a diversity of voices, and to try as much as possible in about a 4-hour program to show that there is a very, very important fork in the road, and it is about these fundamental things. Are we moving towards the earth and towards reconstituting community, and with that reconstituting what it means to be human? Or are we actually buying into the propaganda for robots and believing that they can be more kind and wise than humans, and going down a line that is resource intensive, energy intensive, and means that we will be running after technology and becoming more and more dehumanized? We so want people to think about how it feels when they pick up the phone. They want to talk to a human being on the other side, and they get a robot, or they get maybe someone on the other side of the world who knows nothing about their context. So I'm so glad that you could join it, Danielle. And
will it be so it's live broadcast for 4 hours, but then all the things are recorded and streamable afterwards, so people so it becomes a resource for people in not just on that day?
Absolutely. It will be a resource for people. It will be a sort of repository of everything local. And of course, we have a lot on our website, Local Futures, anyway. I'm amazed myself when I try to look for things. I mean, there's so much there in terms of books and films and past talks. But I think also what we're going to be doing is we'll be screening at 6 o'clock New York time, 6 o'clock London time, 6 o'clock Sydney time on the 21st. And that means that people can tune in at that time. And if they want, in some parts of the world, if they want to watch more than once, they could do so. And we'll have questions answered. We'll have teams of people on each continent so that you can send in questions, you know, in the chat box. So that's how we're planning to run it. But the rest of it will be pre-recorded. And
if you send me the recording of this talk,
yeah,
then I can use this to promote the day in my networks, and then you can take out of it whatever serves for.
That would be fabulous. And it doesn't matter if it overlaps, if you promote it with what we have. So that would be fabulous. Könntest du auch auf Deutsch? Ja, weil du sprichst auch Deutsch, oder?
Ich spreche auch Deutsch. Fällt mir manchmal etwas schwer, weil ich...
Ich verstehe das, ich weiß, wie das geht. Ja, weil ich auch, weißt du. Aber könntest du vielleicht so etwas wie, ja, weil wir eben mit Mehrfalt und so, you know, something like, I send you my best wishes for World Localization Day, and I'm so glad that I can be with you. Könntest du das auf Deutsch sagen? Und dann werden wir vielleicht so ein Chorus, weißt du, von verschiedenen Stimmen in verschiedenen Sprachen zusammenstellen.
Okay, also ich bin wirklich begeistert, dass dieser World Localization Day, der Weltrelokalisierungstag, stattfindet. Wunderbar an der Spring. Ja, nicht.
Ja, also ich sage das nochmal. Und auch ein bisschen.
How difficult it is for me. Yeah. I try it one more time. Ich bin begeistert, dass es endlich einen Weltrelokalisierungstag gibt. Wir müssen wieder zurückkommen zu unseren Gemeinden, zu dem Boden, der uns nährt, zu den Bioregionen, die uns das Leben schöner machen. Und wir können nur eine Welt, die für alle funktioniert, schaffen, wenn wir lokal zusammenarbeiten, um die Welt und unsere Ökosysteme zu heilen. Man kann die Welt nicht retten, aber man kann Orte retten. Und zusammen durch Relokalisierung können wir jeden Ort auf der Welt retten und damit können wir auch die Welt retten, was eigentlich ist, unsere Zukunft retten. Also vielen, vielen Dank, dass ihr euch beteiligt am Weltrelokalisierungstag.
Vielen herzlichen Dank. Could you also perhaps how much are you working with Jen now? I'm wondering whether, I guess Kosha quit.
Yeah, I'm talking to Kosha, I think next week. Yeah.
Okay, but she's quit, and now who's taking over from her?
It's all in flux, as far as I understand at the moment.
Okay.
I haven't really had communications with her, but I think it's the team. I mean, Jen was always quite decentralized, so there will be people stepping in.
You think so?
They should be. I mean, are they not part of the?
No, not really, and they should be. They should be. I could. But who should I talk to if we speak to someone from Jen and we'd like to have them as partners? It would be Kosha.
Yeah, I mean, I can write to her and double check, but
could you send her the link to our website? Have you seen our website?
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Oh, if you could send her the link to the website, and probably if she were able to just send in a message from Jen, and then we could also have Jen as a partner, and then hopefully they help to promote it as well. Which networks can you promote it in?
Well, I mean, basically through my work now, reaching 500,000 people around the world.
Wow, wonderful.
With different social media outlets.
Great.
I hope, I mean, that should get picked up by, like, for example, part of this movement for me is the ecosystems restoration camps, the land regeneration movement, common land, lots of different movements that are already going in that direction. All the movements that are working on bio-regional changes. So the Regenerative Communities Network, Common Earth Initiative through the Commonwealth. So yeah, I trust it will travel once we put it out there.
Well, I hope it does. We're really counting on it. Can I also, so I'll send you also, we have some materials for social media and stuff. So I'll send you that. But wait a minute, there's just one other thing I wanted to ask you. So you're okay to write to Kosha about, because we have so little time. You know, because it's June 21st, right? So we have, and the deadline for getting material in to be aired as part of this is sort of yesterday. It's very, very, very
I'll,
soon.
I'll send her an email right now saying you
Oh,
should really get
thank
in
you.
touch. And then
Oh, I know
maybe,
what I wanted to ask you. I saw that you were part of this thing called One Earth Live. Do you remember?
Mhm.
How did that function? Was that all pre-recorded? Did you see it? I was going to look and then I didn't have time.
Because it was over the weekend and I'm very committed to finding time
Oh,
offline.
okay. Yeah.
I didn't tune in, but it was basically 7 parallel live stages with
Yeah.
all the musicians offering, wonderful musicians from all over the world,
Yeah.
offering their gifts. And then there was also a speaker stage, and
Uh-huh.
Charles Eisenstein and John Liu and me and lots of other people, like a really nice group of people were invited. And that was, as far as I know, all pre-recorded short interviews and sessions that
Uh-huh.
were then.
Oh, so you think the talks were pre-recorded, but the music was live?
Yeah. So
And who
certainly in
contacted
my
you?
case,
Who
I
contacted you
think.
to do it?
Pardon?
Who contacted you to do it? We were trying to figure out who actually
One,
did
one of
it.
Becca Daikini was is a woman who lives
Oh,
in the Bay Area, Mill Valley area, and she's
Becca.
part of the network. And do you know her?
I think I do. I mean, isn't she connected to Uplift? Do you know about Uplift?
Yeah, I think she is. I think she is.
Yeah. And
She's a
Chris,
DJ and event producer, and
event
she was the
producer.
one.
Yeah.
She was the one who pulled together the speakers stage.
Oh,
So
did she?
she was the one who reached.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
there's a number. I'm in a conversation with the guy who runs the platform Playing for Change, which is a really beautiful music industry based
Uh-huh.
platform, to also basically create another online event around financing regenerative projects around the world.
Oh, okay.
So
Do please mention us, won't you?
yeah, I mean, I strongly believe that that is the next step. Like, we need to somehow get the cultural creatives in terms of arts, dance, music,
Absolutely.
poetry, play into
Yeah.
celebrating
Absolutely.
the, the wealth of meaning that comes back when you re-inhabit the earth again.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's
And don't forget about community, because this is where our work has been a bit different. I spoke to Joanna the other day. She's a dear, dear friend. But within the West, somehow, well, I think I know how, but you know, the vital importance of intergenerational community with humans as a way of allowing children to develop a healthier sense of self, not such a frightened little being that then is so hungry and becomes so vulnerable and manipulative.
have never been
Yeah,
separate.
yeah,
Our
yeah, yeah,
connection to our ancestry
yeah,
is a connection to
yeah,
life's ancestry.
yeah,
Life is a
yeah,
planetary process.
yeah,
We
yeah.
were
But what often
not really
happened, you
alike.
know, with this whole view of people holding the earth in their hands and very much a type of managed environmentalism, we lost sight of that, the fact that it's the earth that holds us in her hands, and that place-based existence is necessary. And by skipping out the need for actual face-to-face, real, ongoing community, it becomes easier to become part of this, yes, global, one earth. We all, you know, we all love each other. We all love the trees. And
I increasingly believe that the one fundamental change where we sort of veered off the road is because we didn't have the cultural traditions intact that reminded us that we belong to the earth and are expressions of the earth rather than the earth belonging to us. And that's where it all went wrong. Like, if we can recreate cultural narratives that remind us that the only enlightened way to work for your self-interest in terms of the ego is to actually work in service to all life.
yeah,
And that's why I sometimes also get a little bit annoyed with this framing that we're moving from ego to eco. Like, I think the synthesis will be expressing self, ego, in as a relational being to community, and community there is the human community all the way through our ancestry and into the future, and it is also the wider community of life. The two are inseparable, and we need to if re-inhabitation, re-indigenization, relocalization are part of regeneration, it's all about this process of seeing ourselves as expressions of life again. And life does one thing really well, creating conditions conducive to life. And it happens always at the local scale, and always now, never in the future.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you.
It was a pleasure to reconnect with you, always is. And,
yeah.
and I do hope that things will change in a way that we'll actually get to hug each other in the future.
Yes, it was lovely to see you in Madrid not so long ago.
And lots of love to John as well.
Yes, thank you. He's much better right now, which is fabulous.
Excellent. Good
Lots
news.
of love, Daniel. Yeah, let's keep collaborating.
And you'll send me a link
I'll
to
send
this.
you social. Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful.
Bye-bye. Bye.